Hello, people of Earth. This is Tesco with Rip Kenny and Trap Jesus, and you're listening to the Human Music Podcast. Woo!
Human Music Podcast. I like it.
Yo, 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 what is up, humans? I hope you're all doing beautiful today. We are, because we have a very special guest today. Katie, aka Slowform, is joining us to talk about her production journey, which I'm super excited for. And obviously my two lovely co-hosts, Trap Jesus and Rip Kenny, the boys. But I'm super stoked about this episode because I've known Katie for quite a while, and you've made some pretty big moves and took music from a never thought about it to a maybe to a doing it full time thing. So that's super exciting. I think a lot of our listeners are going to appreciate that perspective of how you sort of went through all that and what you've learned in the last few years, because your music has become so much more expressive and articulate. So with all that being said, thanks for joining us today, Katie.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Yay! Woo! Yeah, this is one we've wanted to do for a while. So really excited to just chat with you, chop it up, ask how things are going, and talk about your journey. And you could ask us questions. We just roll with it. It'll be fun.
Yeah, we kind of just kick it and then end up talking about profit, like predictions of the future and insights that blow your wildest dreams. So we expect nothing less today.
No pressure, though.
Yeah, so why don't you just start us out with why you got into music, kind of your inspirations, and kind of what pushed you into this sphere?
Okay, sure. So I've always said that music was my passion. Since I could, go to shows starting in high school, loved going to shows. That was my favorite, thing to do on a weekend, and always listened to music with, cooking, showering, driving, music was always playing, but it never really occurred to me that it was something I could make or that I would enjoy making really, which looking back now, it's of course I would love doing this. Why didn't I start sooner? But it just never occurred to me. And it was, I graduated with a nursing degree, moved out to Colorado, got a nursing job, did that for a year and a half. And then I switched over to working the night shift. And so I would, work 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. And a lot of time on those shifts, there's some cares that you do at the beginning of the shift, some at the end, but a lot of it's just monitoring and you have to be there in case something happens. Or if the patient's more sick, because I did home health care, so I just had one patient in a house. And it was kind of around that time that I was man, I have all this extra time now, because maybe 7 out of the 12 hours I would just browse SoundCloud or watch Netflix or do this or that. And I was I really want something that I can put my energy into and actually not be wasting this time. And so I downloaded, I think it was virtual DJ. And I just started messing around with because I always loved digging through SoundCloud and finding, dope underground tunes and stuff. And so I just had a bunch of that on my computer. So I just started messing around with that, figuring it out. And this was around fall of 2-3 years ago. And that New Year's, our friends and I were having a New Year's party just in someone's basement, and one of our friends, Kyle, DJs. And so he was going to DJ. And I talked to him a few months before, and I was hey, Kyle, I've kind of been messing around with this at work lately. Can you show me some things? Can I play a little set for our friends on New Year's? And so he did, showed me some things. And then New Year's, I played a little 1 hour set or something. And it was my friends were super supportive of it, but it was really that night I had a few people be was that your own music? Have you ever thought of making your own music? And honest to God, like until that moment, I really hadn't. And so when I had like a couple different people say that, I was like, like, I don't know, maybe that's something I could be into. And so a few days later, I downloaded Ableton Trial, opened it, was like, what the hell is all this? Like, I have no idea what any of this is. I never, had any friends that produced, never seen a DAW, never, was completely clueless. Started searching on YouTube, just like how to make a drop. Like, I don't even know what I need to be searching right now. And so it's funny because then it was like a few days later that I saw an ad for the Breakthrough Workshop with Bill Gates and signed up for that. And it was just like everything I needed to hear at the time. And, like I said, I was at that point where I was like, I have this free time that I need to like be spending doing something. Like I was just getting so bored, watching TV and just like wasting that time away. And so I ended up joining and just, it's like, I really want to give it my all for this first year, see where that lands me. And, if after a year I'm not into it, I can, step away and be like, okay, it wasn't my thing, but clearly I'm still here, 2.5 years later. So
yeah,
it's kind of funny how it all came about, but I'm, feel super lucky to have found the 808, early on.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah,
That is so fucking cool that you found that like straight away. I wish.
Link in the description, by the way.
I wish so badly that I knew those resources existed and B like invested in my personal growth as a producer, like from the jump. Like this, literally, we have the exact same starting story. Like, was always a huge like music fan, downloaded Virtual DJ, started making some like just hitting the record button like I was going to record a mix and just record a mashup of a song with like another song, like just the vocals. And I like showed it to like my other homies in college and they're like, dude, this is sick. You made this? And I was like, well, yeah, I like made the mashup. I didn't make like the songs. And they're like, why don't you make the songs? And I'm like, I don't have a good answer. I guess I probably should. And you're like, oh yeah, I think like I could sit here and like think of a banger like just as much as any of these other ones I'm listening to. If I could just get what's in my head into the computer, I'm sure I could do this. Yeah, I think you guys are right. And then realized after opening Ableton and just, I think I've said this on the show before, but I had Ableton for 6 months before I ever realized how to get a sound that I thought was cool out of it. I just downloaded the trial or whatever, the light. So I didn't have any of the instruments. I didn't have any synth or anything. I had no concept of you need a synth to make the noises. And I also didn't know arrangement view existed. I was just in session view and I couldn't figure it out. I had no fucking clue what I was looking at. And I would just open it, try and get it to work and then close it. And like, no, not for me. And then finally I found arrangement view and my brother told me about this thing called Massive, which you can make sounds in. And I was like, oh shit. So I got Massive and I put that into Ableton. I figured out how to make just like a loop of kick drums and then a MIDI of this one sound in Massive. And I was like, oh, I'm doing it. I'm doing the thing. This is sick. And yeah, from then on, it was off to the races. But yeah, no,
love it.
That's great.
Those early
Katie,
so fun.
do you want to talk a bit about where you're at currently in your journey and sort of, now we have kind of what brought you to this point. You want to talk about like what you've been working on currently and what sort of opportunities you've been getting involved in? Let's get there in a minute,
because I'm actually, since we're talking about beginnings, I really want to hear, like Evan said, he had been, working for a while trying to figure it out. So had I. I think Tesco, you two had been making music for a hot minute before finding the class video. So what was it like, Katie, finding the best coaching program that you could possibly find to make dance music right away? Like, I had to unlearn so many bad habits when I showed up. That's been more than half of my journey in the class of 808 and at Producer Dojo has been unlearning the bad habits I didn't know I was forming over the years. So what was it like just showing up to get good coaching when you didn't know anything yet?
Totally. Yeah, I've actually thought about that before because like I said, like every now and then I'll get that thought that I'm like, I regret like not starting all this sooner and not, starting learning all this sooner. But then I'm like, but when I found the dojo, when I found 808, and like I am so glad that I not only found, dojo and stuff, but that was basically like all of my starting point from there. But yeah, it definitely was like really overwhelming the first few months just because I got like thrown right in, all the weekly downloads, all the content, all this. I'm like, I don't even know what MIDI is right now. Like this is a lot to take in all at once. And so, yeah, like the first few months were definitely rough. And it's, like I said before, it's a good thing when I made this decision, I was like, give it your all for a year. At a year, like if you want to reassess and it's not for you, that's cool. Because those first few months, there were definitely times I was like, I had no idea what all went into this. This is like way more than I thought I was signing up for and just wanted to like call it quits. But super glad I didn't. But yeah, it just learning all that stuff, like you said, not forming, the bad habit or not having to unlearn bad habits and just forming, like I got in the habit of finishing songs like right away. Like I never went through a phase where I just made a bunch of 16-bar loops because I was taught from the start, like finish every idea. So like the first, like all my songs pretty much, it's just, okay, even if it's a bad idea, like finish it. I don't have, a bunch of like project files that are just half finished songs. Like all my songs, whether they're good or bad, are like a full idea, arranged out. So that's probably one of like the most helpful things.
For sure.
Yeah.
People starting out
and just learning to like, totally. And just learning like how to take a day, just a writing day, like, and all you're going to do that day is write. To get the whole idea out, flush it out, and finish as much as you can in that day, not like leave it for another day because then, the emotion's not there as much as it is in, when you're first getting it out.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
That concept of like going through the whole process and not getting stuck in a loop is so important. That's fine. So like when I started producing, it was actually me and my brother that were both learning how to produce in Ableton at the same time. We so 2 episodes ago, Gills, like that asked the question that was me and my brother's first project. And it's funny because he would do a lot of that kind of thing. Like he would just like make like a loop and then kind of like send it to me like, is this good or not? And would rarely make like full things. And I was the exact opposite out of naivety because I thought that I was going to be able to take whatever idea I started with and turn it into a full track and expected by the end of me working on it that it would be good, which is completely fucking false. I spent 3 months working on the first track that I ever made, like every day after work. I'm talking like every day, just fucking with shit in the same project on the same idea, making this 6.5 minute long abortion of big room abhorrence. And it was not the most productive use of those hours, but it did teach, like it was just like kind of what I did. Like I would start a new idea and then take it all the way to the finish line just because I expected that like I could make it good by the end. And then by the end it was like still not quite what I wanted, but I was like, oh, there's moments in here that I like, so I kind of justified it to myself like that. But there's definitely a healthy balance in there. If you don't know how to mix yet, like that's okay. Like do some basic moves, try and get it to a point that you can call it done, but don't sit there tweaking shit endlessly. Don't go back to your midis and change one little note. Don't go back and rewrite the rhythm of your main sound. Like I would go back and just like expect that I could change these little things to make this idea like amazing.
Don't expect no rewrites, but like if shit,
you're starting
if it's whack, you're not going to fix one MIDI note and it's going to sound right.
Right.
Yeah, that's before Evan learned about the Dojo philosophy of getting to quality through quantity.
Right.
Take an idea, put it through the process as best as you know how today, and then move on and do another one, because it's that repetition that's going to get you good, not the sitting on one dumpster fire hoping it cools down.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Totally.
So how, Katie, how like was the process of going through that quantity for you, like right out the gate, and actually just finishing ideas? Were they coming fast, or was each one taking a while?
So it was like half and half. Some would, some wouldn't. Throughout like this whole time, it definitely like me.
Shouts out to Evans wheeling his chair wheel by wheel, nudge by nudge, over to get a beverage from his mini fridge. Yeah, we paused to talk about what you were doing because it was really fun to watch. Are you still muted?
I was elaborately scooting
It was a great
turn on
scoot.
my air conditioner and get a beverage.
Go subscribe on YouTube so you can watch Evans scoot.
Like if you're not subscribed on YouTube, you miss the cube diagram.
Oh, mix cube.
Yeah, you need to see that one. You need to see me scooting around the studio.
Let us know in the comments if you want more scoots and diagrams.
Dude, I'll start scooting and
I'm diagramming all over the place.
All right.
But anyway, so yeah.
Slowform.
So yeah, Katie, how was that process for you and like discovering that quality through the quantity?
Yeah, so it definitely took me a little bit for that to like fully sink in. I tried to like the first like 6 months to a year, I tried to hold myself to like one writing day at least every other weekend, if not like every weekend. And it just like took me from like getting out of my own way and out of my own head and trying to make everything like perfect and finished. And it definitely took me a while to get that through. But then I think it was really about a year later, I did FOM for the first time, the February album writing month. And that was when I was really able to see like, oh, wow, it really like, quality through quantity, like the song I wrote, the first one of that month versus the 12th or whatever from that month, it was just like night and day difference. And so since then, I definitely try to kind of like in spurts, I'll like pick a month where I'm going to be like, oh, I'm going to, write as much as I can, like, because I try to hold myself to like 1 or 2 tunes a week. But like at the start of COVID, I did like 2 months where I did like 10 or 11 songs each month, and just like that growth in those 2 months. I mean, that's how I wrote my EP.
No wonder you're so good so quick, dude. That's fucking ridiculous.
That was like, so it was like April and May, I think it was, because it was like the start of COVID. I'm like, this is really a great time to just like really dive in on my music. I was like starting to find my sound, but I didn't feel like anything felt fully me yet. There's like, bits and pieces I would like, or I'd be like, oh yeah, I like that. I'm not like upset about it, but it's not like what I want to, put on my EP or something. And so the first like 2 months of COVID, it's like, let's just write a bunch. Don't even worry really about mixing, just like write. And then June, July, and August is basically when all my songs on the EP came to life. So it definitely helped.
Yeah, let's talk about the EP a bit and where you're currently at in your journey, and how did writing this EP, obviously talked about, quality through quantity, but how did that feel compared to prior, and tell the listeners a bit more about the EP and what they should expect from it.
Yeah, so it's been a long time coming. I know Sean like reached out to me like it was like last April, so like a year and a half ago, almost a year ago, saying like, oh, like start thinking about this. And then like Dylan gave me a call like last fall being like, okay, I think you're ready for your EP, get it going. And since then, like I've been trying to, but it just like I was saying, the songs coming out, not that I hated them, I still plan to release a lot of them, but it's like, I don't know if that's like what I want to put out on EP. And so, yeah, I don't know. All of these songs, they just kind of were like those magic writing days that you like finish the writing day and you're like, I don't even need to wait until my ears have a break and listen back tomorrow to like know if this is going to be good or not. Like this is one. So
those days that you get to the end of and you're like, I can't fucking believe I made that. Like you like you spent like 16 hours in one day and it's like 4 a.m. and you listen back to it like one final time after like taking a break and you're just like, I can't believe this materialized in a day. That is the reason you come back every time. For all those writing days that you just make a turd, you get that one where you're sitting there late at night and you're like, fuck, man, this is sick. I don't know how this happened. It's just like you get in that flow and sometimes it just works perfectly. Those are the most beautiful moments.
Totally. I thought I had my EP done and I like turned it into Sean and everything and was going back and forth on it. And then I had a writing day like that last weekend. So not this past weekend, but the one before. I was like, oh shit, yeah, this is one that's got to be on there. And it was one too that like 4 or 5 writing days prior were just like, they were meh ones. They weren't terrible, but they weren't anything amazing. And like you said, it is one of those that at the end of the day, you're like, oh shit, yeah, I forgot how great like this feels when they just like come out like that and it just like goes well the whole day pretty much. And
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Stylistically, what have you been working on? I know like you were in that sort of deep dubstep, wobby sort of bass kind of music. And how has that changed over time, if at all? And what sort of new stuff have you been playing around, experimenting with?
Yeah. So I still definitely like that vibe a lot. I really just like what I want to get across with my music. I really like the music that it's like the sounds are heavy in a way, but like the groove of it, it's more of a groove than like a high energy, like headbanging kind of thing. But it still has more high intensity parts and just like really focusing on telling a whole story with it and like lots of contrast between. I really like doing like the, dark, deep wubs, but then also having like some nice melodies, either in sections or like woven throughout. I really like doing just like minimal drums because I just think it allows me to have more space, just like so much space to play between and like have like interesting rhythms and things that would be more difficult to do with like a lot of, with more crowded drums and stuff. And so I've really been liking doing that and playing with like percussion and stuff.
Sick.
I love your sound. I love your vibe, and I love that like you've explored so much in it, and there's still so much you can explore in it. But no matter how different this song is from that song, like I can hear it and be like, oh yeah,
dude,
that's
honestly,
Slowform. That's a cool style.
That is one of the reasons I was so excited to talk to you and get you on this podcast, because I don't know a single other person that has gone from starting to make music to finding a sound that is really like obviously them as quick as you have. I maybe twice as fast as the next guy. So I just want to know, like, is that something that just really came naturally to you? Like I feel like even from the first song that you sent me, I was like, she kind of
mixtape you curated.
Yeah, that first song that I've ever heard from you, I was like, she gets it. Like, there's something about this that's like just very authentic. We've talked about that on the podcast a bunch. You have to be authentic, but just like, yeah, did that just come super naturally to you? Is it something that when you started making music, you were intentionally like, I don't want to make what everyone else is making? Or was it just more like it came out?
Yeah, so it's funny you bring that up because like circling back around to like when I started all this, and like another reason I think I never really got into it, if you would have asked me 2.5, 3 years ago if I was a creative person, I would say absolutely not. Like I always believed I was like the furthest thing, from a creative person. I was always good at math, enjoyed science. So I was like, oh, like I enjoy like math and science, so therefore I can't be creative. Like, which sounds so silly now.
Like a mathematician.
Hey, a music producer is the perfect Venn diagram of those two things. It's oh, now it's time to engineer.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's like I never realized that creativity was something you could learn. And like work to be creative. I thought it was just like, they're, you know, good at art. They're born, you know, that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I definitely had in my mind, like, I don't want to sound, you know, like what's already out there, but I don't think I was necessarily like actively trying to do that. Cause like my best stuff comes out when I just like don't think about it, when I'm just like
Totally
get in that flow state. And I just like, that's been on my mind more lately, just trying to do like the opposite of what I would normally do, or like messing with random parameters just to see what happens. Or like one of my new favorite things is just like dragging a clip to somewhere where it shouldn't go and seeing how that sounds. And just like, the more I do stuff like that, the more easy it is for me to get in that flow state. And then, yeah, I wish I had a better, like, more descriptive answer for.
Yeah, that's perfect.
It's one of those things that's like people just assume, like you said, like before you tried music production, you just assumed that it was like this person's genius is imprinted directly into the music that they make.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most beautiful things about electronic music, it's like, it's not just you imprinting onto the computer as much as like that's the preconceived notion that everyone has when you start out, like, oh, this song in my head is going to become the song on the computer. It's way more like fuck around and find out, you know. It's like you just try stuff, see what it sounds like, and you let your taste dictate the result. Like that's why when people are like, oh man, like I don't think I could do that, or like I'm always like, the biggest thing, you just have to get out of your own way assuming that you can't, because electronic music is one of the most beautifully experimental two-way processes that anyone can try, and anyone can make stuff that they think is cool because it's so easy to just like experiment, and then it's there. Once it's in the computer, it's there. It's not like you have to play the solo on the guitar and then play it another 100 times like live. Like, no, that cool thing that you accidentally did is now there. It exists and it sounds that way. And you can now use that throughout your whole song. And it's just like so much more. It's that, I think that's one of the reasons that it's so addictive and intrinsically motivating, is that moment of brilliance, however it materializes, can happen at any moment. And it's not necessarily linked directly to skill. Like skill increases the chances of that brilliant moment happening, but it's not directly related. Which is
it's like going to the casino, the creative casino.
It is.
You can get better at it, but still we're all just like fiending for that one little mud pie accident that's going to change the course of the whole track.
You just get better at counting cards. That's it.
Exactly. But it's counting cards is essentially mud pies. That's like the equivalent. And like you said, in electronic music, as soon as the sound is made and you have it printed in audio, it's there now forever, and you can do whatever you want with it. And that's the crazy thing about this style of music, is you get one little accident. You could be 40 hours deep in a song. You think you're at the end in the mix down. You get one little cool bit and you're like, holy shit, that's the bit. It took you 40 hours to get there, but that whole bit maybe changes the way you rewrite that first drop or the outro of that song, and it ends up becoming like the fucking thing. So that's huge, man. I feel like that concept doesn't lend itself to like maybe improv genres, but not in the same way, because it's not saved.
Yeah, Evan, something you said there too was a big like turning point breakthrough for me early on, when I started thinking of it more as like, oh, just play around until something catches my ear, then go with it, versus like, oh, I have to like write and arrange this whole track. Looking at a blank slate, where do I even start? Like that was one of the many things early on that like really helped me get out of my own head, out of my own way. And it's like, oh, this actually, like, don't have to make it super complicated. Just like mess around, an idea will appear. Sometimes it's like 30 minutes in, sometimes it takes like 2, 3, 4 hours, but
yeah, I love that.
My favorite is when you start in the idea phase and you're just making a bunch of ideas, and then 5 hours in, you realize that the first idea you made that you're like, let's see if I could make something better, ends out you replay like all the 20 ideas you have sitting there, and you're like, first thing I made after 5 minutes, I probably should have just rolled with that, because now it's 8 p.m. and yeah.
But it's really nice when you have all those intro ideas and you get like way later in the song and you're like, oh, I need more shit. What do I need? And then you're like, oh, I have like 10 stems right there of stuff I did not use at all. And then it's like gaining the 3 mushrooms in Mario Kart. You just fucking zooms you. One thing I wanted to ask you, Katie, I love asking this question. We had this discussion a few podcasts ago. But generally there tends to be a trend we feel where like every 3 months or so, you kind of hit a new level up as a producer. And that's like, it just seems like that often your style changes noticeably, or you just like really integrate some sort of technique or something. So do you have anything you'd say in like the last however many months that you feel has either like really changed the course of your writing stylistically, or has just like generally improved workflow and writing and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, totally. A lot of things, really. The past like several months, I've really been like focusing it on my mixing, taking like the best practices with Seth and stuff. And that's just like opened my eyes to a lot of things. Like right now we're talking about imaging and going deep on that. And like, I've been really enjoying that. I've like never really thought of imaging as just like another tool to help like add movement in your song. So like, you know, pulling the imaging in certain sections and like really being aware of like where everything's placed. That's something I really hadn't dove into yet. And then on the writing side of things, there's been a couple weekly downloads the past like few months that have just like really sparked some breakthroughs for me. One of which was the Bad is Good episode, where he talks about like, you know, making sound, you know, shitty, quote unquote. Like if you heard them on their own, you'd be like, that's, you know, nothing great. But the way all of those fit together, you know, to create that one full mix instead of making every sound be, you know, super wide and take up all this space and stuff. So that has helped me a lot.
I think of that like a jigsaw puzzle. If you're going to get the pieces to fit together, this one needs a big chunk carved out of it, and this one needs an extremely obvious chunk sticking out of it, and then these two pieces can fit together as a nice mix and see the whole picture.
Totally. Yeah. Another big breakthrough I recently had, I had a lesson with Chris Cryptic Chronica, and I was just went in and just like I had him give me just like a rundown, like refresher on groove, which was super helpful and something that has helped me like just like the last 2-3 songs, but I'm pretty sure I'm like most likely going to carry it out and be doing it more often than not. So I had been pushing all of my drums off the grid, like snare was a little early, kick was a little late, hat's always late. And kind of he made this point to me that, you know, he suggested putting at least the first downbeat like on the grid so that it's, you know, a very clear, like, you know, place for, you know, the downbeat and stuff. And ever since then, so I started doing that. And now I've been putting all of my kicks, because I, you know, have super minimal ones, but like kicks and snares on the grid, because, and I was talking to Moonspotted Jack about this in our last session, like it's been helping me. I was struggling getting grooves that were like, I felt like my grooves were kind of jerky or robotic and stuff. And by doing that, like putting those main drums on the grid has allowed me, because like the sounds in between would also be off the grid. So it was just like everything was off the grid. So it was almost like there was no reference of anything. Yeah. And so like now by putting those like main drum hits on it, it allows me to like play more in between and have more like wonkier, you know, patterns and stuff, but it still makes sense to dance to, which that has helped me out a ton with my last few.
That's such an important balance. Like you want to be wonky, you want to be groovy, but it's so easy to go too far. And that's, like you said, that's a great way to strike that balance between having something where you know exactly where it is. You can dance to this without thinking at all, without counting, without doing any math. But then all of the other percussions and sounds that are off the grid help you really get that groove going. And shouts to Cryptochronica. He was on episode 11 of the podcast. Go check that out, listeners.
The boy.
He's such a smart guy. He's a brilliant teacher. He just has a really cohesive and clear way of explaining his processes. And he's got a bunch of processes that he's developed himself. They're just like really smart and dialed in. But like what you were talking about with the drums specifically, I totally agree. My method is normally first kick perfectly on the grid. And then like for the next, 2 bars, every other kick is somewhere that's not directly on the grid. And the snares are moved like command key and an arrow, like maybe 1 or 2, but basically, since the snare is kind of the thing keeping time in a halftime song, it basically on the grid, but like not exactly. And then everything else is just fair game in between there. But the first kick and then the snares are like basically on the grid, and then everything else will make sense because you have that like locked in groove with those.
Totally. Yeah, I was definitely struggling with that for a bit because like someone would be like, oh, it just like doesn't really make sense to dance to as much, or it's like you don't have like a steady rhythm going. But when I was writing it, to me, it's like, oh, I've heard this a million times. I know what's coming. So to me, it would make sense. It didn't seem like awkward and jerky because I'm like, oh, like, yeah, of course that goes there. But now taking a step back and like really doing that and like being like, okay, all the drums on the grid versus how they were, then I can be like, oh yeah, it definitely has way more impact, on the downbeat now. And it definitely like holds more steady rhythm.
Mm-hmm. Do you find there any things that you're doing now towards the latter end of the process when it comes to wrapping up and finishing tracks? Because I feel like a place where people commonly get stuck is towards the end. And oftentimes they'll bring like projects to sessions where they're like, it's cool. Like you can listen to it and be like, that sounds objectively cool. But as a song, it's missing that last like 5%, the mysterious 5%, as everybody calls it, but nobody knows like how to overcome it. What little ways have you found to like take that tune over the finish line?
Honestly, more often than not, mud pies. Like just mud pies, the master, and like then it just because it like you're saying, I'll be like, okay, yeah, this sounds good. That could be done. It's a full idea, but it's not like that, wow, what is this track kind of vibe. But then resample the master and then Portal, I recently got that, and that has been like my favorite thing the past couple of months now. So that, or throwing it into a granulator and just like making a 10-minute long mud pie or whatever, and then chopping that up and chopping those bits back in. And sometimes I'm like hesitant too, because I'm like, oh, I spent all this time like perfectly arranging this, but then it's like if you just mess around with that and chop stuff in, and then you're like, oh no, that sounds way better. Oh, like we're gonna roll with that. So yeah, my pies is definitely that, and like just taking the time to do all those like little effects, like the sweeps and little impacts and little background splashes and effects and stuff are typically my last few things that I'll do there.
I'm so glad you said that, because mud pies and subtle ambience and effects, those are always the first things I have to bring up when somebody comes to me with this, because they're always, I guess mud pies aren't really unaddressed. They're a writing technique, but like effects get unaddressed all the time and just don't get given that like love and movement. And, it's just like one of those really easy things. As soon as you start incorporating from the start and thinking of it as equally important, it really just integrates that like last 5% into the writing process, and it's not as big of a thing. But that makes me so happy.
Yeah, I'm super glad you brought that up as well. Like literally, I think we even had a session together where we were working on finishing up a track for you, and you're like, how do I make this lead cooler? I was like, let's mud pie the lead too. Because everyone thinks like mud pie the bass to start, and then that was your mud pie. Like, nope.
All the things.
All of the things. And then one of the things that I constantly try to impart on people too is like all those mud pie sounds that you made. Like, I'm sure there's like a longer bass sound or something. Like, literally just drag a manual volume fade on one of those longer bass sounds, throw some reverb and EQ out the highs and lows, and make your sweeps out of the random mud pie bits you haven't used yet, because the texture of those sounds is going to fit the overall palette of the rest of the track, because it's like similar to everything that you've already used. And especially in music like yours, where like everything has a very cohesive vibe. You're not going to grab a spaceship taking off riser from a cymatics pack and throw it in your music and expect like that it's going to sound good. Like, you have to find
take the basses out of the riser and go the other way.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that is one of the things that I really think separates like an amateur sounding track from a pro sounding track. Like, a pro will take what they already have in the song and create the parts that they don't have yet out of those pieces, so that everything feels really cohesive. When you're just grabbing stuff, random stuff from a sound library that it's not part of the same family and not part of the same palette of sounds. It's like a film has a consistent coloration all the way through. And a song should be the same. Like, you're not going to have one scene that's like vibrant rainbow neon colors and then the next one that's like all blacks and purples and like super dark. Like, that would be jarring. It's the same thing with a song. Your palette should be your palette. Like, you should think about the textures of everything that you're using and try and make them line up as much as possible, so that nothing comes in, you're like, it's a little out of place. Super important.
Totally.
Amen.
Totally. Yeah. Speaking on that, that's another thing that's given me a good breakthrough, like the past several months, kind of related to that, just like really focusing on that one sound that is like the holy shit, I can't believe I, have this sound to work with, and just like diving in deep on that, and just really, because this was, something Dylan touched on when I went out for my dojo visit. Like, before I went there, I was very much like finding 4 to 6 cool sounds and, making them in a cool pattern and still checkerboarding and stuff. Yeah. And like it worked as a groove, but it just wasn't cohesive as a full song. And so that was something that I focused on when I got back. And like, especially these last few months, I'm learning more and more like how much better my songs come out when I do that, when it's like, okay, this is the sound I'm like gonna, dive in deep on, duplicate a channel, add some like delays or, filter it, whatever, duplicate a channel, make another version of it. But yeah, how you were saying, just like makes it one cohesive idea versus like all these little, break off points coming in and out.
Totally. Shout outs to duplicating channels, because that is the shit. You don't have to automate everything. If you literally just duplicate your channel and create some sort of order. I always think in terms of hierarchies from the Mixing Weekly download. Like, just the idea of hierarchies in general has become like a foundation of my whole process. But if you duplicate it out 4 times, there needs to be some sort of hierarchy where some are bigger and some are smaller, or some are wider and some are more pulled in. And a really easy way to do that, if you want like evolution over the course of your song, check out anywhere where you have a main part that's repeating for a few sections or your whole song potentially. Duplicate it out into like a few different layers or levels of intensity, and then just level each channel 3 dB down from the next quietest. And bam, now you have leveling on your side immediately. And then if you add delays, reverbs, whatever, you'd have to really fuck it up to not get like evolving songs at that point. Like, you're setting yourself up for success by just having, I envision it as like the same way a conductor would like tell the horns to sit there and the strings to sit there, you're sort of setting a few open spots in your mix. And you could be like, for this section, all right, piano stay there and then come here for this one, and strings pull back here. And then you could take one more step forward and like just drag and drop from there. Shout out duplicating channels. I feel like that's not talked about enough.
Not everyone's the first chair clarinet, man. You know,
that exactly. If what most people do is put everything in the same position of the mix, and that's equivalent to like having your guitar player sitting on the drummer's shoulders while the horn player like stands on his head, and they're all like condensed into the same spot in the room.
All elbowing each other for position.
Yeah, right.
I saw this thing on like a guitar forum, like really early on. Like they're like the saying, like, don't just stand there, play something. And like in a band that has like, you know, 5-6 pieces, like multiple guitarists, someone was like, nah, sometimes what you need to tell them is don't just play something, stand there. You know, like sometimes, like, yeah, like stop playing. Like you got to take instruments out sometimes, you know?
If you're a DJ, you don't got to worry about that shit.
True.
Unless you're going B2B. Just flail around.
Yo, I got a good question. So I love the way your basses move and wub and wobble and wiggle and all those fun W words that they do. What is your process for like kind of generating your bassy ideas? Because they're such a centerpiece of your style.
Mud pies.
Yeah.
So I've gotten like my workflow will change and stuff, and but the last like few months I've gotten a pretty good like starting place just for, again, like getting out of my own way, getting ideas down, like starting to mess around with it. And so kind of my process with that, I'll just like, you know, kick on the one, snares, and then make like 2, maybe 3 channels with like basses that so I've like realized lately the sooner I get into like the mud pie phase, the better. So I try to like not make the perfect bass sounds. I'm just going for like something that I'm like, oh, that's cool, or like I like the tone of that, or like, but not trying, because once I'm like, oh, that's not the sound yet, like it'll take me hours, you know, to like tweak around until I get something I'm really stoked on. So I'll spend maybe like 30 minutes or so just like pop open Serum. That's my usual go-to. Sometimes like Operator or something though, and just like making, you know, a bar long of, you know, a tone of some sort, and, you know, get some like movement with LFOs and effects and stuff, but make it like decently cool. But then once I'm like, okay, yeah, that's like has a good groove, some different like textures and sounds in there, then lately I've been turning to Portal for throwing that on and just like messing with that. And then I just love doing audio editing then. So I'll get like a 10 or so minute mud pie and just scrubbing through, finding the cool bits, and just working on the 8-bar loop until I find like a phrase that makes sense to me. And sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes it comes out right away. And a lot of times too, I notice it will change as like the song progresses. I don't know if this like happens to you guys a lot when you're writing, but like you'll have like your groove or idea and you think it's like cool at the time, but then as your song progresses and you circle back around, you're like, no, that's not as great. Let's like tweak it around and like move some things around. Maybe trash that idea, start some new ones. But yeah, just mud pies and then audio editing with those, and just like stretching things, pitching things in weird ways, heavily saturating things to where they're just like clipping like crazy, but making like really neat distortion from doing so. And delays too. I really like playing with the delays and like the cool effects. Lately I've been getting some really cool results with like putting delays on like super saturated clipping basses and flattening those, but only taking like the delay portion, not the actual original sound, and have been getting like some cool tones and textures and like movement that way.
That's badass.
Hey, I'd love to hear your perspective on post-processing, because that's another topic that I do a lot of sessions with people on. And a lot of the times it's generally an easy fix. It's the sounds are just a bit too sterile because they don't give enough like saturation and distortion and get that like grit. Do you want to talk a bit about your perspective? Because you've like fully internalized that concept, but I remember before when we would go through tracks, you were very much in that phase as well. And now having overcome that, how would you describe that process of like beefing up a sound, and like what is distorted enough, or I guess how far can you push distortion? Basically, don't make your shit soft, right? Like the sterile sort of like cheap sounding sound. Do you want to talk about how you got away from that?
Yeah, because I was definitely stuck in that for a bit, and where I had in my mind like, oh, I'm gonna do one thing and it's gonna like break the sound and it won't be usable and it'll sound terrible or whatever. So I definitely was like, didn't like use compression or like saturation or anything for a while. But then
do you think that was like a holding back, like being scared of doing the wrong move type mentality? I see. Okay.
Totally. Yeah. Because ever since I started thinking of it as like, how can I break this sound, or like, how far can I push this sound? It just like things started clicking to me, that and just like referencing more and hearing, like actually listening to the sounds of other reference tracks. But yeah, really just for me, it was just throwing shit on there, like cranking it as, far as it can go until it gets past that point, and then like taking it back. So like anytime I'm doing, sound design or like mixing or anything, I'm always pushing something to the point that it breaks and then taking it back from there. Unless I like the sound that it makes when it breaks, then I'll leave it there. But yeah.
So smart. I was gonna add that, and you just like totally nailed it. Sometimes it does sound better as it breaks, and then you're like, oh fuck, that's sick. I'm gonna use that as a little glitchy fill. But if you're unsure how far you can saturate it, if you're unsure how far you can distort it, push it until you know for a fact it's too far. And then
it's just like trust your ears with it too. Yeah. Like it was totally of like, well, does it sound good to me? Do I like the sound it's making? Like, then cool, I'm gonna keep it. Yeah,
like establish the outer limit, and then you can run back. Just real quick too. Yeah, use that for limiting on your master. Everyone's like, how far can I push the limiter? Push it until it starts to go splat on the kick and snare, and that's how you know it's too far. And then pull it back a dB and a half.
Doing that too, the like pushing something too far until it's not, that's what helped me learn how to tune things by ear too. That I was telling someone the other day, like that they were like, how do you tune things by ear? And for like a while that seemed so, far-fetched. Like, I don't know how you do that, but I just like trained myself to do that. I would either take a frequency shifter or just the pitch on the audio clip and put it, way down or way up to where it wouldn't be. And then just like not look at it and rain your eyes until you're going back and forth, being like, okay, now that's lower, that's too high. Because it's all, like reference and, perspective to like what else is there. I couldn't tell you what note it is. I have no idea about that. But like, I can tell you if like, oh, this needs to be a little higher in pitch to like match what I'm trying to match that's already here or not.
That's also, you touched on such an important thing too. Close your eyes and fuck with the knob. Mm-hmm. So often, like a science-minded person like myself or you, like I'll get into trouble because I'll just like use my eyes on a spectrum and be like, oh, this is a resonant peak here, I need to cut that out with the EQ, or like, adjusting a filter or like a effect or something. I'll just be like, just going not what the sound needs, but what I think the dial should be at from a previous song or what's worked before. And then you just end up screwing it up. Like you like close your eyes and adjust the knob to where you're like, that feels right.
Totally.
then-
I'm always closing my eyes, and also like having, you know, what you did and then turning that off and on to where you lose if it's off or on. Close your eyes. Which sounds better? Open your eyes. Okay, is that on or off? Did I really need that? Did that actually make it better? Or was I just like, oh, I add this to everything, so this gets it too?
Sausage fattener.
I mean, that's an exception.
All the way up.
I love that you touched on that, Katie, because that was going to be my follow-up question to the mud pie stuff, because that's always people's first question if they have doubts, is like how to get that confidence in knowing if you're on the right path or if you're picking the right samples or whatever. And like, that's, I think what you outlined there is like the perfect way to train your ears to do that, is like push it. I always think of tuning effects personally as like you push to both bounds and you sort of oscillate back and forth until you like tune it to the sweet spot. So you explore the whole range and then like narrow in on it.
Okay, yeah.
Yo, I'm gonna switch gears here because I want to ask you about that sweet, sweet Sam Shoemaker and Trap Jesus remix you did for the for the Do It For Me remix EP. I know we've touched on the fact that Rip Kenny did a killer one, but I want to hear about the process of Slowform's amazing remix on that EP.
Yeah, totally. So that song almost didn't come out because I almost gave up on it halfway through like 7 different times because it just was not working. I had like part of the idea came out like fairly quick, but then the rest was just like not working. And I, you know, tried like, it had like 5 or 6 different iterations of ideas. So I was just like, I think I had the first half down, but not the second. I think, I don't know, it was a while ago, but yeah, it was like half of it was, half of it wasn't, and almost gave up on that a few times, but glad I didn't because yeah, it ended up coming out pretty good.
Man, my biggest song I almost gave up on too. So that's hilarious.
Yeah, that's something for people to remember. Like if you're like, man, I like this, but maybe I should just give up on it. You know, maybe take time to come back to it. But if you're worried like that, you're worried because it's dope and you're worried about not finishing the dopeness. So push through and make that happen.
Yeah, or you listen to it way too many times. Like what you said about, oh, I know to expect this, so it sounds proper. Like that is so a thing you have to watch out for.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that remix, like, I mean, by the time you turned it in for our remix contest deadline, like we played yours, you know, we had whatever, it was like 17 remixes that got turned in before the deadline. And I had Sam Shoemaker sitting right behind me here and we were playing all of them on Facebook Live and yours came up and he was like, oh, who is this? This is my jam. I love this style. So I low-key, high-key got to get you and Sam on a track together again.
Totally.
But by that time, me and Sam were already like, ooh, we love this one. This is definitely in the top of the pile, like for sure. Mm-hmm. Then an entire year of messing with those songs with Ilgate's feedback happened. So let's talk about that. Like you got the idea wrangled and you got a really cool idea. And then we turned the pile of the best few ideas into Ilgate's. And it's like, okay, now the real journey begins. So let's talk about that process a little bit.
Yeah, that was definitely, it was a great learning experience because I was like that was the first like official release I had. And so a lot of that stuff that he was telling me, I was like learning right then and there. It definitely was a lot. It was very difficult at times. And like, because it had been so long too, a lot of my writing techniques, like I found better ways of doing things. So like towards the end of that, I was like, oh man, I have to like open up this project again. Like not because of the song or anything, but just because it was a terrible mess and like the routing of things and the mixing of things. And I think I redid the mix on that like 3 or 4 different times because I would like learn something new and be like, okay, I know I can like do this better now, but I have to redo all of it, like redo the mix. So it definitely was like a trying thing. It definitely took a lot of energy, took a lot of willpower to keep trucking through on it. But yeah, I'm stoked I did. I learned a ton in the process. And yeah, I'm trying to think, because that was in March, right? Like March at the remix contest, March or April. And then it was like,
I'll believe you.
yeah.
It was legit a year from when it was like, yep, these are the songs, to when it actually got released.
That's true. Yeah.
It's a tough process just in and of itself, having a year to think about it and having a year where you open it up every month or two and try and come back to it. And you're like, right. Now I remember why this couldn't be better, because this thing, when I turn this knob to fix it, breaks it. And being able to, it's always so hard when you have to like redo work on something, you know, when you're like, I did this already, but it didn't work. And I have to reverse all that shit and try it again, because you have that like internal fear of, can I make it better? Is it going to be better? Am I going to waste my time? I already did this. I'm frustrated. I have to do it again. The one thing that I always just like try and force myself to remember is that, like, regardless of if it ends up better when you try to redo it or not, you're not worse off than where you started. Like, you could try it again. Like, yeah, it might take some more time, but it's not you. It's just it's so easy to build up that like resistance in your head to like, I don't want to do that because it might be worse, or I don't want to do that because, like, you know, it's not going to be what I thought it was going to be, or you have all these preconceived notions of why it won't work like that or whatever. But it's just coming back to you got to try it. You got to fuck around and find out.
Well, and if it doesn't
find out,
right? Well, and if it doesn't come out better, it's like you found those ways that don't work then, and now you know that for next time, and you won't make, you know, you'll try another way of getting to, you know, an end result.
Totally.
Yeah, and if your mix, like, that's people like look at their mix like, well, I already did it, and it's like, yeah, but it's not good, so it's not the one. It's not mixed. Yeah, you attempted. I've had to learn that lesson the hard way. Like, yeah, no, I already did it. Yeah, no, just don't worry about that. The mix isn't carved in granite. It's molded out of Play-Doh. If that Play-Doh isn't working, smush it back into a ball and start over. You still have all of the material. You still have the tracks. They're still in the right order. The arrangement still exists. Just mute everything and start over with the kick. Bring back the kick. Make it sound better than it did. Bring in the snare, make it sound better with the kick than it did, and just do the whole mix again and try to make everything better than it was. And you will learn so much through that process. And, you know, I'm sure, like, now that you're saying, like, you've been doing, you know, you'd spent all this time writing, then you had all these tracks to really focus on getting your mixes down. You made a bunch of material, and then you were able to really focus in and do mix after mix after mix. And I imagine that process was transformative.
Yeah, that's one thing that I want to ask you as well, because for me, the thing that took the longest and the thing that I thought I could just force my way through with book learning and YouTube tutorials to make things sound good was how to really actually translate a mix into something that sounded professional after, you know, mastering. The final product sounding professional. It probably took me 5 years really to get something that I'm like, okay, like, I trust my ear now enough to know that this is like pro level. What were some of the biggest breakthroughs mixing wise that have allowed you in just 2.5 years to finish tracks that are actually really, really quite high fidelity?
So I got to give like most of that credit to Seth and the approach and best practices, because that, like, before I took that, so I started that, I was in like the first group that took that back in like November, I think it was. So almost a year ago now. Yeah. But before that, like, I had just started really like diving more into mixing. I was like, okay, I'm like getting some, you know, I'm feeling more confident with my arrangement and like getting ideas out. Mixing's the next thing I'm going to like start tackling. And really just like having him do a lot of ear training with us and like referencing and being like, okay, now listen to this. This sounds closed and boxed in. Now this sounds open and wide. Like all these dimensions that I didn't know existed in the mix, like depth and height and width and, you know, all those things that it's just, you don't realize they're there until you're told. And then you're like, can A be, you know, this is wide, this is not. Now like really listen to the difference. And like, so that helped a ton. And like, I started using references a lot more. Cause I really, like, I had always heard like use references, but I was like, okay, use references how? Like, what does that mean? I can hear a difference, but I don't know how to like make my track closer to the reference. But once I like learned how to be like, okay, listen for certain elements, the kick, like listen how punchy it is, listen to the transient response on it, listen to the frequency response. Now listen versus yours. And just, I mean, I can tell my mixes get better and better each time. The first few months first few weeks, I guess, of Seth's course, when we were redoing them, Luke, like you said, I went back to like one of my previous mixes and I swear I remixed that one like 6 or 7 different times. Cause the first like 5 times it turned out terrible, like garbage. I was like, oh, my old like wimpy mix was way better than what I have now. This like just big distorted mess, but just a matter of like practicing and doing it over and over again. I can tell like my ears, like I can pick out those like harsh resonances more. I can pick out like when something's sounding dull and closed versus open and wide. And just a lot of referencing and ear training on that.
Yeah. Amen. Big shouts to Seth Drake. Shouts to The Approach. Definitely.
Link in the description.
Has been a huge, level up for me as well.
Amen to that. He has a really
and
good
just
way of
the whole
articulating.
idea of like connecting sounds together, like starting from truth. Yeah. Because when I had started, you know, diving on my own and mixing it, felt like I was just going in circles. Like I would just go through and be like, okay, let's make everything as wide as I can, you know? And now it's like, okay, mix my sub to where, you know I want the loudness. I know how I want it to feel. Now let's marry the kick to that. And he just did a really great, like few episodes on the low end and just like listening to the 30 to 60 hertz band on its own. And then also the 60 to 120 because of across like all genres. Those two like frequency bands are relatively the same. Like what you'll hear in there, the like volume levels, the width, the punch in it, it's all relatively similar. So like, then, now you have your kick and sub together. Those are working great. Now bring in the snare. Like that helped a ton, just like thinking about connecting the dots between sounds and using EQs to help connect those dots, like boosting different frequencies so that you can be like, oh, let's boost, this frequency in the lead. So now it's touching the snare more. And now it's more like of a combined unit versus the snare being over here and the lead being over here.
Yeah, that's one of the things that was really eye-opening to me as well. Like we had touched on earlier in this conversation, how when you're making a song, you should think of your color palette, right? Like the textures and everything should match, right? And I had kind of a concept of like why that made the song sound better, but it was brought full circle because I never really thought about that in a mixing stage. I always felt that about a song when all of the parts that I was using felt like they fit. It's because they had a similar texture and character. And then when he was like, explaining in the mixing stage how you can continue to develop that idea into making your palette of sounds when you think of your song in an engineering fashion, to make the palette of sounds even more similar, to bring everything closer, to like blend the colors together essentially, right? Like you have to take that concept all the way to the finish line, right? And then at the end, you just have this perfectly cohesive masterpiece that looks like it was painted by the same artist on the same day with the same intention, right?
Totally. Yeah, that's like the stuff I've been learning in there. I mean, all the last like 2.5 years just been blowing my mind, but like connecting the different elements and how like EQs because I love how he does like the deep dive on these simple tools that it's like, I really didn't know how they worked or what, you could use them for. And like talking about how, EQs, when you're boosting, you're boosting those frequencies, but you're also introducing like phase differences, and that will make certain elements or certain frequency bands of those elements like jump out at you more. So it brings it more to the focus. So like if you boost like 80 hertz in a kick, like, you're increasing that like low end punch, but you're also bringing it more focal in the mix. You're making it jump out more. It's not just like a volume, change. It's actually bringing it like closer to you, which was something that is really cool to play around with. And I thought was like really interesting. I'd never thought of it like that before.
Yeah, getting, just shows the power of getting around somebody that's really studied this stuff and really wrapped their head around it and had to come up with really cool metaphors and descriptions to convey that back to you. And then all of a sudden, like they're just talking about it the way they thought it up in their mind in a way you've never thought of it before. And all of a sudden these concepts make so much more sense. Like mentorship. Yeah. Whether it's Class of 808, Producer Dojo, the approach with Seth Drake, just finding cool producer buddies to hang out with and Zoom chat, start a podcast and bring people on, whatever, any of these things. It's just all, music's a team sport. Like get around other people that know stuff.
Man, working with people is one of the biggest things, because the thing you said, Katie, about like you get to that point where you don't even know if it's like dope or not anymore. You just lose perspective on the whole thing. It's because you're so in your zone and so tapped into your influences and all these things that whatever you're doing is just obvious. But to Luke, it's not obvious. To me, it's not obvious. To Evan, it's not obvious. And when you have 4 different perspectives like that, where like we don't even realize how valuable our perspective and influences and all these things are, and you bring that to a session and someone sees the value in that, is like insane. Or like you just said, Luke, you hear somebody articulate a concept in a way that makes sense to them, how they mentally thought it up, and then shit just starts flowing for you, and it fills in those gaps in your knowledge that like you can't really have a session and diagnose a problem like that and then address it. But if you work with somebody else, it's just monkey see, monkey do, and you just pick up on it.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. So to close it out, what are your plans for the near future, Katie? What are you, obviously getting this EP wrapped up, and then, what do you see for the future of Slowform?
Oh man. Yeah. Main goal is just the EP right now. It's pretty much there, I think. So hopefully like early next year, I'll be able to be putting that out. Just going to keep writing as much as I can, working on my mixes. Just, I'm really stoked on this EP. I'm really excited to share it, but I still see, so much further that I can go. And I'm just going to keep exploring where my sound kind of takes me and what it develops into. I'm trying not to like hold it in any one direction and just kind of play around and see where it takes me.
And everyone needs to take notes on how many days Katie set aside to like write music, to sit down and write a whole thing. Many people don't put enough time on the calendar to like write a whole song, myself included. It's so important to not just like chop it up into an hour at a time. Like you gotta dedicate time to work on your music and in a long format, and also invest in yourself, invest in your learning. And I think you're an absolute shining example of, when you do all those things correctly, how far you can come in 2.5 years. I think you should be really proud of where your music's at, and how far the journey has come in such a short time.
Thanks. I'm like baffled as to how much I've learned in just like 2.5 years, that it makes me just really excited to see what else, a couple years down the road, where that'll where I'll be then.
Yeah, I'm really excited for you.
I highly expect to be getting weird dancing to your stuff at the Grove at Shambhala pretty soon.
Oh
please.
man, you know.
That'd be a dream.
We all gotta get out to Shambhala next year if we're
Yeah, Tesco, you're the only one I haven't met in person, and that would be the spot.
See, I was kicking myself last year after everybody was talking about how sick it was, but now that it's canceled this year, I'm just.
Did you buy a ticket? Did you buy a ticket for this year?
No.
I don't want to hear it, bro. You're not committed yet.
Well, now I feel the drive to go. So next year, hopefully,
you better be there because we're gonna be there.
Say it to your face,
hanging out, fucking having a great time, and I don't want to be there without you, bruv.
Yeah, we're gonna be on the dance floor getting down to some
such
Slowform.
A blast. Yeah, last year when it was supposed to happen, I was talking to him and I was like, we should be dancing on the village stage right now.
Right.
And
that's okay. Next year, all the dancing, no sleeping to make up for it.
Oh man,
yes.
It'll be so nice when we can socialize.
I guarantee
again.
I'm gonna sleep a little bit. It'll be in the early mornings.
1 power nap. That's it.
That's all you get. You get 1 power nap per day by the river, also cramming living room music into your ear holes.
If a nap is 15 minutes, is a power nap 8 hours?
No, just 15
One
minutes.
power nap per day,
power
bro.
naps are 15 minutes.
Power nap, 15 minutes. Wim Hof breathing into the river, and then you're good.
Into the river? Okay.
Yeah.
The real power nap is when you down a cup of coffee and then lay down for your nap right before the cup of coffee takes effect.
Yeah.
Woo!
That's a big
That's
brain.
a nitrous nap. That's a nitrous nap, dude.
Oh, an intellectual, I see.
Okay, so Slowform, tell them how to get a hold of you and where they got to go follow you on the onlines.
Yeah, so I am /Slowform or Slowform music everywhere.
Hell yeah. Run that shit up and keep an eye out for the new EP. I'm super stoked.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Thanks for joining us, Katie.
Sick. Thanks for having me on, guys. It was good talking with y'all.
Yeah, this is awesome.
Absolutely.
And with that, it's a wrap, humans.
Peace
Take it
out.
easy. Peace among worlds.
Peace among worlds.
I like it. What's up, humans? It's Luke, your friendly neighborhood trap Jesus. Thanks so much for watching the podcast, checking out our videos. We truly appreciate you. So, Rip Kenny, Tesco, and myself got you a gift. We made you a free sample pack. It's got basses, it's got FX, it's got crazy percussion and Foley sounds, and it's free. It's all yours. Just click the link in the description below. Also, make sure to hit that subscribe, hit that like button, and share this with your friends. We appreciate you. Peace out and peace among worlds.